I'm Christelle from Diabetes Strong, and in this video I'll be sharing my diabetes diagnosis story. So I'm actually often asked to share my diagnosis story, and I kind of think it's because it's probably one of those events that's kind of tie us together. And most likely you also remember your diagnosis story. I think most of us do, except if you were like super young when you got diagnosed. And then of course there's those of you who got misdiagnosed the first time around. You probably remember both your first as well as your second diagnosis. I've told my diagnosis story whenever I've been interviewed on podcasts, if I've talked at camps or at diabetes events, and even when I met new diabetes. But I always tend to rush it a little bit. That's on me. Nobody has tried to rush me to wrap it up. But today I'm going to tell you the full story. So let's dive in. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in December of 1997. And this is my diagnosis story. I was born in Denmark, and in the summer of 1997, I just graduated from high school, and I was taking a year off, ended up being a little bit more than a year, but taking time off to figure out what I wanted with life. And during that year, I wanted to work, and I wanted to save up money to go travel the world. So that was the plan, and that was what I did. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs, to save up money. I worked in a daycare during the day, and then I did either bartending or I worked at an amusement park at night. So I was doing quite a bit, but I started to develop symptoms of diabetes. I did not know this. I did not know anyone who lived with diabetes. I had no knowledge of diabetes, but I started to become very, very fatigued. I would blame all the work. I was also partying quite a bit. So there was that. I was kind of burning the candle at both ends. I would blame it on that. It got to a point where I was so tired that I would fall asleep at work. So when the kiddos were, taking their naps, sometimes I would fall asleep as well, despite my best efforts. I was very thirsty, which is also a symptom of uncontrolled diabetes. I was very, very thirsty. I was also running to the restroom, had to go pee all the time. I correlated the two. In my mind, I was drinking a lot of water because I was being healthy. I was going to the restroom a whole lot because I was drinking a lot of water. So again, I tied everything together. Then there was the hunger. I was always hungry, but I always had a healthy appetite. Again, I could explain everything. So I was eating a lot and not gaining any weight. I wasn't dropping a whole lot of weight, probably because I still had an insulin production, but I was eating, most nights I was like eating a box of ice cream and not gaining weight, and I thought it was amazing. But December came along, and I'd had these symptoms for quite a while, and I went to a family event. My family celebrates Christmas, so we get together a whole lot over the holidays. And I fell asleep, I think before dinner at one event, and one of my aunts was like, hey, this is not normal. You should go see your doctor. So I did. I went and I saw my primary care physician. My primary care physician had been my doctors for years. That was a family doctor. And he he looked at this 19-year-old, and we talked a little bit about, what was my life like? What were my eating habits? What are my, how much rest, how much sleep, how much water was I drinking? So he was actually asking a lot of the right questions. And at one point he's like, you know what? You need to eat healthy, get your sleep, blah, blah, blah. But let me just measure your blood sugar. Good thing he did. He measured my blood sugar, just finger stick in the office, and he diagnosed me right there and then. He's like, you have diabetes. Thing is, he might have explained it in details. I do not remember. I do not remember a single word aside from him telling me I had diabetes. And remember, I knew nobody living with diabetes. I knew nothing of the condition. So to me, what I heard a death sentence. I walked out of his office, and that's the only thing I had heard. I got on my bicycle because this was Denmark, still in Denmark, and everybody rides their bikes everywhere, so that was my means of transportation. And I rode home, and all I could think about on the way home was, oh my goodness, I'm gonna die. So that part, that part was fairly traumatic. And again, he might have explained it, so I'm not blaming him. That's not what I remember. I came home and my mom was home, and my mom is a nurse, and luckily she had a base knowledge of diabetes, and she could explain it to me. She's like, this is type 1 diabetes. This is not a death sentence. This is a condition that you can live with and you can live long with. All that happened on a Friday, and not much else happened that day. I came home from the doctor's office. I had a conversation with my mom. I called my best friend, but that was about it. I wasn't given insulin. I wasn't told to poke my finger. I wasn't given any guidance on how to eat. I was just living my life that weekend. I was being a little bit more cautious, but without knowing what to be cautious about. But I was very fortunate that very close to where I grew up is a really, really good diabetes center called Steno Diabetes Center. And I was assigned to that center. So my mom and I went Monday. So the Monday after I'd seen my doctor, we went there to get the basic training and learn how to deal with diabetes. And that was a really good experience. I was assigned a pediatric nurse named Lud, and Lud was pretty awesome. I actually reconnected with her again here a few years ago, which was pretty special. But Lud was a pediatric nurse. Again, I was 19, but I was assigned pediatric nurse. And she was the one who started out by pretty much telling me, this is the diabetes diagnosis isn't fun, but it's nothing you can't deal with. Don't let this stand in the way of you living your life, which was just what I needed to hear. Again, I thought it was a death sentence, and now I'm being told this is not going to stand in the way of you living your life. She also taught me, of course, how to manage my diabetes, how to count my carbs, how to do corrections, all those things. And it was all as outpatient. So that means I was in the center with my mom during the day, and then at night I would go home. And the way that it worked, the way that they did things, were that when I was there, I was being taught about, food, insulin, etc. And when I went home, my nurse would call me every few hours. I can't remember if it was every 2 or every 4 hours during the night. I would go up, I would call them. This is before cell phones in 97. Well, I didn't have a cell phone at least. I'd call her and go, okay, my blood sugar is X, Y, and Z, and she'd tell me whether or not to inject insulin or not. And that was how they sort of titrated me in to figure out what were my insulin needs. Also, at the clinic one day, Lotta and another nurse, they told me to inject, let's say, 5 units. And then they're like, okay, we need to talk to you, just you, your mom can go somewhere else for a while. So she did that, and we sat down and had a conversation. And while we were having this conversation about whatever, I don't remember, my blood sugars were going low, 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 and I could feel it. I'm uber polite, and I didn't want to say anything because we're in the middle of a conversation. But finally, at one point, I'm sweating. They're sitting there looking at me. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I have to stop this conversation. I need some juice. And they're like, congratulations, I guess. You can feel your low blood sugar. So that was a controlled environment to make sure that I could recognize what a low blood sugar would feel like and know what to do about it. So I've gotten better. Now I know that if I have a low blood sugar, I'm not going to just be polite. I'm going to treat it. So I was with Steno as an outpatient patient. I think it was for 3 days, maybe it was 5. So that's where I got all the base training. Again, I spent the nights at home. And after that, I was sent home, and then I came back for checkup every 3 months. I was started on insulin pens, so a long-acting and a rapid-acting insulin for basal bolus, and finger sticks. I still use insulin pens. I've tried a pump, that wasn't quite for me. But I still use pens, but now I also use a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. And over the years, I would say my care has gotten tighter, my diabetes management, my blood sugar has gotten tighter as I've learned more, because of course, Lotta couldn't teach me everything. And a lot of the education after my initial diagnosis has quite frankly been on me. But I will say that Lotta's words saying don't let this hold you back. There's nothing you can't do with diabetes have stuck with me. As I said, when I started this video, I was saving up money to go travel the world, and I did. Because one of the first questions I asked Lotta was, well, I have this trip planned. I knew I was going to go to India on an open ticket, meaning I was going to spend everything from a month to a year out. I was like, can I still go? And Lotta's response was like, yes, of course, you're going. You're going. So that was quite amazing. So within a year of my diagnosis, I was backpacking through India. I had all my insulin and thermos in my backpack, and everything went wrong, and I still figured it out. So this, again, I still did not have a cell phone. At one point, my insulin went bad. This was the older long-acting insulins that you had to mix. So it's kind of like a cloudy liquid that you had to mix. And if you shook it, it'd go bad. And that's, of course, what happened because I went on a camel trek through some desert. So all my insulin went bad. And what did I do? I couldn't really call Lotte on my cell phone, so we were communicating over fax. And we figured it out. And I figured out how to get new insulin and continue my journey. And I ended up only being gone, well, only, it's a long time, 3 months. And it was a great adventure. And that was my diagnosis story. I've now been living with type 1 diabetes for 24 years, coming up on 25. So it's been a while. And I still live by the belief that there's nothing I can't do with diabetes. It might be annoying, and I might have to do some workarounds once in a while, but there's definitely nothing I can't do. I have traveled the world. I have moved, lived in different countries, and just got an education I wanted, married a great guy, and life is pretty good. But I do wonder if things would have been different had I not ended up at Steno Diabetes Center, had Lotte not told me, hey, diabetes does not have to limit you. It doesn't have to stand in your way of doing anything you want. I've been told that the other big diabetes center close to where I lived had a completely different approach to how they educated newly diagnosed people living with diabetes. So they had a more cautious approach. So I do wonder if I'd been told, hey, be careful, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. If that had been the approach, I mean, would my life have been different? I probably, if I'd been told you can't go to India, or again, you can't do this and that, my life would probably look a lot different, and diabetes probably been a burden. But I don't know. So actually, I'd like to hear from you. What was your story? What was your diagnosis story? Were you encouraged? Were you told to go live your life? Were you told to be careful and cautious? And how has that impacted you? That might be some long comments we're going to get, but I'm really genuinely curious. And maybe even more importantly, how do you approach diabetes today? How do you live with diabetes? Thank you so much for watching this video about my diagnosis story. If you liked it, please give it a like below. Also, if you enjoy my content, if you'd like to see more, remember to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. That is that little bell. That way you'll be informed whenever I post new content. Thank you so much for watching.